Keep yourself in the loop of everything football on the Golden State Media Concepts Football Podcast. The latest news on and off the field, be it college football, Big Ten, SEC, Big 12, Pac-12, ACC to the NFL. We've got you covered. Listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Football Podcast.
What's going on? Hello and welcome to the GSMC Football Podcast on the GSMC Podcast Network. It is the duo that is on Tuesday. Here at the GSMC, it is me, Ethan. Brice is on the other side of the line. Brice, how are you today?
I am good, Ethan. I am good, man. Just, going through the daily life spectacle that is currently 2020. And, even through it all, I'm doing well. I'm still able to, I guess, be productive when possible and just enjoying myself when I can.
Nice, man. Nice. That's all you can really ask for at this point in time anyway. At least that's how I'm feeling about it. We do have a few different topics to talk about. Today, some college, some NFL. It's a general football podcast, so we're about to dive in and get into the nitty gritty. We got to talk about some training camp. Brice, how are you feeling about training camp right now? And will the NFL be able to start on time?
Well, I mean, listen, the league has already said that they're going to start on time. Obviously things can change in days, obviously, with this pandemic and with the recommendations of health experts and et cetera. But I feel like there's a chance not every team's training camp will start on time. If that's an answer, maybe one or two, maybe a couple of teams could get in there, but maybe something might change. Obviously, some rookies are reporting this week before the actual training camp day has started. Just obviously because, rookies obviously haven't gotten any work in, so I can understand why teams would want to get them in sooner to be able to work with them and give them some of a chance to, get acclimated to the facility and the coaches and everything like that before all the veterans and everything comes. I kind of understand from the player's perspective why they would start it on time, but at the same time, they need to know, okay, if we're going to start training camp on time, what are the protocols, procedures, what's in it for us? Can we opt out, et cetera, et cetera? If they can work that and hash that out before the actual training camp date, then yes. If not, you might not see certain training camps get started because you might even see coaches and organizations and franchises say, you know what, we're going to hold off for a little bit till we get more information. So, because, training camp usually is where the players go and they actually stay at these camps sometimes, depending on the camp, depending where they go, because obviously everybody's doing it at their home location, so they might not do it this time, which they probably shouldn't. But usually they stay at the camp and just work for 2-3 weeks, where obviously with COVID, probably that will not be the case. They will probably send everybody home, you would think, because they're not trying to do any type of a bubble type of thing with training camp. So, I think potentially training camp, since we are within a week and a half, or almost at all 32 teams, you would think, okay, clearly it's possible at this rate if the NFL stays pat and firm with what they're trying to do. But like I said, depending on the meetings that is had today, next few days, will determine if it actually goes ahead and they actually have training camp start on time.
Yeah, a few coaches have spoken out on the whole training camp thing of recently. Sean McVay went on the HeliPod podcast and he said, usually when you get about a week out, and right now is exactly where we are at, you start to get revved up, starting to get excited. And there's something about this time that the amount of things that you have to take place for it to logistically get off and get going. Something about it tells me that maybe there's a chance that things get moved back. So as you know, rookies on the Chiefs and the Texans reported to camp on Monday, following the NFL's confirmation of the training camp dates, and on Saturday. So other rookies will report July 21st, while quarterbacks and injured players are set to arrive the 23rd. Veteran players are due on the 28th. Then the dates slightly differ for both Kansas City and Houston, since they will kick off the regular season on September 10th. So, you know, everybody else in the league are going to kind of come at a later date. And, you know, despite the announced schedule, the NFL and NFL Players Association have yet to reach an agreement on health and safety protocols. And they're actually talking about that as we record it, I believe, right now. Am I right?
Yeah. I believe they're having meetings and discussions on it. I believe they started at 2 Eastern time. So, and obviously, you know, something like this will probably take a few hours. We haven't heard anything updated. So as far as we know at the time of this recording, we don't have any details from that meeting yet.
Right. And apparently numerous NFL players took to Twitter on Sunday to call out the league for ignoring players' safety, such as J.J. Watt and Drew Brees, pointing out that the players want to hold the 2020 season, but questions over COVID-19 protocols leave them feeling uneasy ahead of training camp. And despite the tension building up over these issues, Sean McVay still believes that the regular season will be played. And he says, what I've been telling our people is, hey, we're going to go and have a great plan. Whether it's the chance to execute and plan out for now or a little bit later remains to be seen. But he's confident that there will be a season and we'll be able to play football, whether it goes exactly on the schedule that we've all seen. That's something that he's a little skeptical about as of right now. So a lot of these coaches, albeit NFL or college, have been kind of dancing around this whole topic of when the season is going to start and is it going to start on time. And, you know, they're dropping words like skeptical and, I'm not so sure, or they may think about planning in the future. It might be a great idea to have, or they'll say something like, you know, we should have all options open because we really just don't know. And I've been really feeling like there's something that these guys know that might potentially be on the pipeline that, you know, everybody else, people like us, don't know. And, you know, unfortunately, we're not at the point to where we have any like NFL insiders giving us info here at the GSMC right now. But if you wanted to put on your tinfoil hat, Brice, and you were thinking about what has been transpiring in just football alone, we don't even have to talk about other sports, but in football alone, major fall sport, and we're in the midst of a huge spike across the country as far as coronavirus cases and the amount of testing that's been going on, showing a rising number of cases are coming in as well. Putting on your tinfoil hat, how do you feel about the season right now? Do you think that coaches are mentally preparing themselves for not having it start on time at the very least, and even getting delayed further than what we all anticipated to?
I mean, I feel like they have to. They can't sit here and just think everything's going to go. You already have executives, all general managers and coaches that think they shouldn't even start on time to begin with. So I think if all that's the case, then I'm sure they are preparing for things to change. And there's some players and coaches and other staff members to hope it changes. I mean, it's not even that they have to prepare for it. They really allow players to opt out. They got to prepare. They got prepared to like, we may not have our left tackle. We may not have a wide receiver. We may not have our top this if they decide not to play. So coaches are going to have to make tons of adjustments this season based on COVID and what happens in the protocols and et cetera. And like they say, like, the NFL has been lucky because their season ended when COVID hit. But now the season's coming back. COVID's still just as big of an issue now as it was then. And now they're like trying to adjust on the fly so close to camp and so close to the season. And you can see that, there is some bit of a difficulty right there. And that's why I can understand maybe even frustration from coaches, head coaches, about it. I mean, I've seen, things that have been said by coaches like Brian Flores. He's told his team that, don't think we're going to lace up week one. Like, we don't know what's going to happen. So what do they call it? Cautiously optimistic, because we don't know what's going to happen. So, we're still going to do what they tell us to do, but I don't want this to be oh yeah, we're definitely playing, because obviously there's 3 teams in Florida, and Florida right now is the epicenter of COVID. They're probably more concerned in that section than maybe a team like New England, where there's barely as many cases up there, but every team, every coach has different concerns depending on where they are in the entire NFL. But obviously, in terms of the concern around the entire NFL, I'm sure every coach is concerned. So it really just depends on what needs to be done and what needs to happen. Because like you said, players have called out the league. Obviously, there has been some recommendations that have been made to the league that I guess the players are not hearing is going to be made or actually done by the league. And I'm sure coaches may feel the exact same way, because like they say, in the NFL, this is probably out of most of the major sports, or almost every major sport, like the top 4 major sports in America. If you're talking about from a team-to-team basis, they have the biggest staffs than any other sport, usually in the major 4 sports in America. So obviously you're dealing with more people. So obviously the more there is an increased risk there. And obviously as a head coach, you're just like the players, just like other staff members. You have a family at home. Your wife might be pregnant, something like that. And you don't want to put them at risk because you got to go to a job, and maybe the league hasn't put you in the best position to protect yourself on the field and also at home.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that the players have every right to feel like this isn't enough. And especially considering how much time they could have had to prepare. I'm sure they've had people who are super, super smart and are really up to date on this whole Corona thing in their offices and in their Zoom meetings and talking through different protocols and what's the best case scenario to do. But it still also feels like they had a lot of time to get this done, and it doesn't seem like they've made any progress. And maybe that's not necessarily ineptitude on the NFL. Like, I don't feel like the NFL has been completely inept on this. I just feel like that's just the nature of what we're dealing with here as a country, that we didn't socially distance long enough, and many people's talking circles have said. And this is what happens when we weren't able to, do it earlier. Now we're backing into different phases again. So some places are going back to phase 1. Some are different phases still that never got to phase 2. Some places went wide open from the start, and they're seeing a lot of repercussions from that as well. So now we are at a place in the country where we really don't know what the actual status is and what is a good baseline for everybody to start a league like this, when it's not like you're not requiring NFL players to do things. And we all know that they have to go into hotels to travel. We all know that they are going to probably have to figure out a deal with either certain hotels or certain, businesses to make sure that their players are safe or in good condition at all times, or about as good as they can be, because until we hear something where like NFL players are not allowed to basically live their life outside of football, and what I mean is they can't go out, or they're not supposed to, or if they do, they get in trouble by the league or whatever the case may be. Like, I don't think they can impose those sort of tactics. So, it's all risk factor at that moment in time. And that's the scary part. There's no 100% guarantee that you can keep people from going out. And even if they do go out, they could be as safe as possible and still come back with a positive test. And that's the whole deal, is that there is no 100% way of keeping these guys safe. And they're not even doing the safest measure that like the NBA is trying to do. And the NBA is having their own issues with players ordering outside food, and not everybody seems to be pleased with the bubble environment. And there's just no way an NFL team could have made a bubble, or sorry, not an NFL team, but the NFL probably couldn't have made a bubble on the fly for 3 months and figured that one out, because there's too many players, there's too many coaching staff members, too many medical staff, Then you got all these writers and people who report. It's just so many things. Camera crew. It would have gotten problematic for sure. It wouldn't have been nearly as smooth as what the NBA has done. And the NBA took a very long time, almost to the point where people thought it just wasn't going to come back. And even now they still are kind of working out all of the kinks, still trying to work with Disney to accommodate to the players' wants and also to keep people safe. It's a lot going on, man.
Mm-hmm. Definitely a lot going on right now.
So with that said, we're going to take our first break in the podcast and we're going to come back talking a little bit more NFL, and then we'll transition into college a little bit, talking about the Power Five and then the SEC. I know Power Five, SEC, such great football discussions there. We all love talking about the Power Five all the time, but big things are happening in those specific conversational pieces. So we have to talk about it. But this has been the GSMC. We'll be right back.
Are you looking for help for your fantasy football team? Check out the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast. Get today's best advice on who to start, who to sit, even who you should draft. From sleeper picks to red hot lineups, they got it all covered for you. That's GSMCpodcast.com/fantasy-football-podcast. We'll cover traditional leagues, dynasty, PPR, even IDP leagues. When you need fantasy help, there's just one show to hit up. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Okay, we are back here at the GSMC Football Podcast. Last time we were talking about training camp, what's happening, how do we feel about it, how does the league seem to be handling it, how do players feel about it. We talked all about that in the first segment, and now we are moving towards low key. So I titled it low key for a reason. Brice, are you still excited about what's to come in the season? I would hope so. Yes, you're doing a football podcast.
Yeah, of course. Always
right.
Excited to see what's going to happen during the upcoming season in both seasons, in both college and professional, and just football in general.
Right, because we are not Debbie Downers here on the GSMC. We would rather think positively that there will be somehow a way to see the season come through and just keep hope alive. So in the spirit of keeping hope alive, we got to talk about when the season does come back, speaking it into existence. What do you see as something very low key to you that has been lost in translation over the past few months in the NFL that you are still really excited to see play out? And how do you feel about it now, currently?
Well, a story that I'm looking to see play out is a story that we talked about earlier in the offseason, obviously, even what could be going on just because of how big the news was, because of what this particular story involved and who it involved and what happened. I'm still intrigued and curious to see what happens with the Bill O'Brien, Houston Texans situation, just him in general. Is he gonna make it to the end of the season? Is all these moves gonna pay off? Will people be calling for his firing all season long after they lose the game? Will they pay Deshaun Watson? All of that, to me, is one story that I am very intrigued to see what happens. Obviously, with everything going on, we have taken some of that attention away from that story. But in my opinion, I think that's the story to take curiosity on, because we remember when they traded DeAndre Hopkins, how much heat he got for that. And obviously, we've known for years, if you've been listening to the Houston Texans fan base, they have not liked this man for a minute. It's pretty weird when your head coach is not very liked within your own fan base. But that's Bill O'Brien for you. So to me, like I said, they got to pay Deshaun. If he didn't want to pay DeAndre, I hope he's not going to sit here and say, Deshaun, I'm not paying you what you want either. Because if that happens, if I'm the owner of the Houston Texans, I got to make a move, because at this point he's hurting us. He is making us a top 5 draft pick team if we lose Deshaun. And then also just the temperature of the players is, a lot of people like Deshaun. I mean, a lot of people like DeAndre. when he was on Houston, and you don't want to rub your team the wrong way. We haven't heard a lot of reports about how players feel about him, but I don't have this feeling that maybe players are not as fond of him. I'm not saying like Adam Gase openly is disliking him like in the Jets, but maybe they're not fond of Bill O'Brien also on their side of things. And then just in general, his performance as being the GM and head coach, and just how everything would go with the season, because obviously if they don't reach expectations, I just with everything that's happened during the off season and everything that has occurred, I just don't see the owner letting Bill O'Brien stay if they don't win or they have a losing season, because you can make the argument he made moves and he made decisions that hurt the team. And how can you keep a man employed that you can maybe say purposely hurt the team? So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out to me this season when we see Houston hit the field. Obviously, people can make an argument with COVID-19. Could this save coaches' jobs? Because not every coach that was on the hot seat has the same, depending on what happens with COVID. I guess they didn't have the normal off season, and then you don't know if the season's going to go as normal, and and that could hinder why maybe team doesn't reach performance or standards or whatever. But I definitely think that is an intriguing situation to keep an eye on with Bill O'Brien and the Houston Texans, and what happens throughout the season and decisions that are made. And if we hear any reports of any displeasure, any irritatedness, fed upness within the Houston locker room with Bill O'Brien as well.
Yeah, I do have to agree with that. It's not my favorite, but it is something that we all kind of not took for granted. We just kind of threw it by the wayside. It was like one of those, it was 72-hour media cycles, and then it kind of went away because things just started to get more and more crazy throughout the incoming weeks in the NFL and in the world in general. So a lot of people may have forgotten that, Bill O'Brien was under some heat, and a lot of people were speculating if this move would even be savable, like salvageable, if, say, they start out like 0-3, is Bill O'Brien gone? And I guess that's in the ideology of that the league would be in a place to where they could fire a head coach, put in the interim, and everything would be cool. And I guess they still could, but now it's a lot different feeling. Would you even fire your head coach now? Like, is Dan Quinn technically secured for another year? Has he, like, what happens? Like, say this, right? Dan Quinn, they start the season, and maybe within a few games, things aren't looking well league wide. And Dan Quinn potentially may not be playing, like, might be coaching his best game or his best few games, but are you still going to ride with Dan Quinn, who's been there for 5 years? Or are you going to fire him in the middle of a COVID-19 season? I feel like a lot of owners and a lot of GMs are looking at this situation and saying, you know what? We might, like, if everybody's suffering, we might as well just keep the dude here and figure it out in the next season, rather than, do it mid-season, have an interim, and then you have to do the whole searching for a new head coach in the middle of all of this. Like, let's remind ourselves that Cleveland went and cleaned house before all of this started off. So they're the most recent team that I can think of that legit, like, cleaned house directly afterwards, and they don't have to worry about potentially losing out. While a lot of these other teams who have a lot of guys that are on the hot seat bubble per se, maybe thinking that may have been a mistake, or now they have to stick it out for about another year and some change before they really see what decision they need to be making, because it could end up being one of those lost seasons in, like, many sports times where this might be one of the first of few lost seasons we've ever had in sports for football. And with that comes a whole bunch of other different consequences. But my low-key storyline and thing I'm looking into for the NFL this year that we seem to have moved on from a little bit is, what do the Rams look like in 2020 now? Because the Rams are a really shaky team. They still almost made the playoffs, and they were definitely one of the favorites to come out of the NFC coming into the year last year. They did not have a good year, and we know Jared Goff had a real hard time last year, struggling to really look like who he was before. We knew Todd Gurley wasn't healthy, and I guess we didn't assume that he was that much of that offense, and maybe we should have, but it just looked like since Todd Gurley's initial injury onward, even into the playoffs, that team just did not have the same vigor or the same type of swagger, and things just kind of unraveled and when losing the Super Bowl, and it kind of carried over into the new year. Now it's a kind of a fresh slate. Sean McVay, I'm sure he's been in the lab, and they also got a new running back within their circles via, the draft. And a lot of people are looking at him to be somebody who they can really utilize. And at the end of the day, it all revolves around this passing game scheme. And looking at it, for me, I don't really know what to expect from the Rams, because they kind of showed us the Jekyll and Hyde thing. And we know Cooper Kupp hasn't been 100% healthy, and now they don't have Brandon Cooks anymore. So things are kind of shaping up to be a mystery on my end of what they could potentially be anymore. And that to me is extremely interesting in an NFC where the other three teams could all potentially take a big leap, right? Like we have the Cardinals in there, we have the 49ers, and we have the Seahawks, all in the same division as the Rams. And I feel like the 49ers and the Seahawks are already proven. We know what they can do, especially the Seahawks. And the 49ers look like they have a well-oiled machine now. And of course things could change, because we thought about that for the Rams. But for all intents and purposes, I think that their defense is still going to be very elite, and I think their offense will only improve as long as their quarterback improves. But the Cardinals are a team that could sneak up in the rankings in their division, because, it's 1 year under Kyler Murray's belt. They got a new wideout who is a stud, and they're about to figure some things out. And, Larry Legend is still going on. They have a lot of good wide receivers like Captain Kirk out there. I just think that they are a team that shouldn't be slept on. And let's not forget about Kenyon Drake, as he's a guy who really exploded once he was traded away from where he was at. So there's a lot of different offensive weapons on that team that makes me feel like they could, give that division a run for its money and be a little bit better than what other people think that they may end up being. So it's not all peaches and cream for the Rams to make a comeback, especially in their own division.
Mm-hmm. And, what's interesting about what you said also as well is that, like you said, the entire division is very interesting. Obviously, you brought up the Rams. Also, one thing we have to point out with the Rams as well, that one of the reasons why also their team, you can maybe say, has gone down is because the Rams I believe they still do. I believe they have the oldest roster in the NFL. And with the oldest rosters, there's more wear and tear on older players, and obviously breaking down and maybe getting towards the end of the season, they could potentially, not be as fresh as maybe a younger player would be. So obviously that could be one of the reasons why they are, from a talent and name value perspective, they have the talent to be one of the better teams. I mean, they have a lot of people who consider is the best overall player in football, Aaron Donald. And then, they have talent other parts. Obviously, they traded for Jalen Ramsey and et cetera. And then obviously, when you're going to talk about the Cardinals, they have a lot of up and coming young talent. Kyler Murray going to his second year. Kenyon Drake obviously breaking out, last year. He'll be the main running back this year. You got DeAndre Hopkins, Larry Fitzgerald. But technically, from those, you hear those names and you know what you know, you would expect that offense to potentially be a top 10 offense, especially with Cliff Kingsbury running the offense that he ran at Texas Tech that likes to put up big numbers. we'll have to see what happens with that. And obviously we know about Seattle and San Francisco. So, and we know how basically the 49ers, if they continue on this rate, could be consistently good for years to come. And then Seattle obviously has been good literally since Russell Wilson has been there. So they're the model of consistency within that entire division. But yeah, definitely the stories and the low key that you talk about is very, very intriguing to keep an eye on as well. I definitely agree with that.
Yeah, man. I think that the NFC West is probably the most interesting division to me, just by the scale of, there's a lot of things that could move and shake. Like, that division always feels like it's a flip flopper, just like the NFC South does sometimes, but typically it's just Atlanta and New Orleans who flip flops depending on what's happening in the season. But I don't know. Maybe it's just the whole NFC period. I feel like the only NFC division that I really don't pay attention to too much is the NFC North. And I guess that may be just the Aaron Rodgers syndrome, where for a long time, Minnesota wasn't that great. They didn't have a quarterback. And we know how the Bears have been over the past decade. We know about the Lions. It's just been Green Bay over there, just basically sweeping the division or mopping up the division wins for about 10 years. And now they are basically only in competition for the most part with Minnesota, and every blue moon Detroit tries. And this is no disrespect to Detroit or the fandom. And we know the Bears can be a tough out too, but we know whose division dogs they are. Like, we know which ones they are, and it's Green Bay and Minnesota. The other two are kind of flip-floppy and not as consistent. But I don't know. The NFC has a lot of interesting teams involved, and they all I feel like the NFC is like the Western Conference of the NBA, where there's just so many teams that could potentially win it all. And the AFC is a little bit more like the Eastern Division, where the AFC has some teams that have a lot of growing up to do and a lot of building to do, and they're not as complete as some of these NFC teams. But we're going to take a break now, and we're going to come in after the break talking about college football, what's going on, the biggest stories going in through that whole shebang. So we'll be back.
Check out the show that's built on the MMA. From the UFC to extreme cage fighting, they got the fights covered. Check out the GSMC MMA podcast. Get the latest news on past or upcoming fights. Join us as we talk to and about some of the biggest names in the MMA, past, present, and future. When it's the fight game, there's just one show to check out. GSMCpodcast.com/MMA-podcast. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Okay, welcome back to the podcast. Me and Brice are still here, and now we're about to get into college sports. As we were just previously talking about the NFL, what are low-key storylines still coming out of the NFL season that we are still anticipating to see how they turn out. And then, of course, we talked about training camp news and all of that. So now we are talking about the SEC, the Southeastern Conference in the Power 5 of the NCAA. They have been having a few meetings here or there, and last week they had a meeting that brought up a lot of different plans within how they handle the regular season for college football. As we know, the Pac-12 and also the Big Ten, I believe, or was it the Big 12? Mm-hmm. Yeah, the Pac-12 and the Big Ten decided to not do non-conference games this season. So that means games against USC for Alabama and the Texas A&M versus Colorado game are off the schedule already, entirely taken away. And that's already posing a big issue. And if the ACC decides to say they're not playing or they're not going to do any non-conference games, then that is going to be a big determiner of how, the SEC handles all of these things, and they have to create a plan, because let's keep in mind that some of the bigger non-conference games the SEC has are within its rivalry week, where, Georgia plays Georgia Tech, where, we get so many different places. So Florida plays Florida State and so on and so forth. There's a lot of ACC games that cross over and play the SEC. And it's been like that for, I guess, the test of time, it feels like at this point. And that's also in jeopardy as well from both sides. One side could just decide the fate of those games, and they have to be prepared. So the SEC brought up a lot of different plans, but 3 of them stuck out. One was an 8-game non-conference schedule, so there'd be no non-conference games in that schedule at all, so everybody would be playing within the SEC. And then there is the 9-game and the 10-game, where each added number means 1 non-conference game included. And it seems like a lot of people want to include non-conference games to some degree to make up for the money loss and all of that, because if you don't play non-conference games, of course you can there's still the hardship of what comes down to the bye games. And if you don't know what bye games are, it's where smaller universities basically ask, like Alabama or LSU, you can play us to get an easy win and more exposure to all different types of places for like $1 million. Like we get paid like $1 million or something like that to basically get beat down by these larger teams. And a lot of these, group of 5 teams or lower do these type of deals. And if there are if they're non-conference, of course, which they are, now it's all in jeopardy. It's all in limbo, because if the SEC says, we're not doing any non-conference games, how are you supposed to honor those contracts that were already made and decided upon in the future? So it's not like they can say, oh, well, it sucks to suck. You can't get the money, because I'm sure a lot of universities need these non-conference games because it helps them basically not be in the red every year when it comes to athletics and funding a whole lot of different stuff for the university. So a lot of colleges and a lot of universities depend on this money. So it's not as cut and dry. And of course, the SEC or any other college institution that is doing non-conference or not playing non-conference games, a lot of them are thinking, oh, wow, we don't want to have to shell out millions of dollars and not play the game. So there's so many different factors involved with all of this. And people still want to attempt to preserve so many different things. So they want to, attempt to preserve the rivalry games. And some even believe that it's all speculative about all the contingency plans they're trying to make, because even at the end of the day, you don't know if it's going to work. So there's a lot of different opinions coming out of these meetings in the SEC. And the consensus is that, administrators and athletes still want to play. And of course, they don't have a decision to be made yet until late July. So like the last week of July, a decision should be reached from the SEC. But of course, we know that the Big 12 and the ACC could also make a decision that could basically shatter everything else that they're trying to do. So, Brice, how do you feel about the SEC and any other big college Power 5 institution how are they going to handle this whole non-conference game thing? Because it felt like once the other two decided upon it that they would kind of all come in agreement, but it doesn't look like that's happening at all.
Well, that's why the power system they've constructed within college football is kind of like every Power 5 conference is their own league almost. Like, you do what you want to do, you do what you want to do, and you do what you want to do. Because think about this dilemma. Let's say the SEC does decide to have the 2 non-conference games. remember, the Big Ten and the Big 12 and the Pac-12 have already agreed to do 9 non-conference. So there's a chance that the SEC will be playing one, like let's say they still have the playoff and everything. So you're going into that with the SEC still playing one more game than the Big Ten or the Pac-12 school. And so obviously you're going to have very uneven records. How would that affect polling, knowing that would maybe SEC team have an advantage, even if they have a loss because they played the extra game, then the Pac-12 with the Big Ten team? Obviously, I'm assuming they would still have an SEC championship or like the Pac-12 championship, Big Ten championship. So obviously that will count. So technically everybody's going to play 10 to 11 games. So you're still getting close to like a normal regular season 12. I think that it really just depends. I mean, I saw a report saying that if Alabama, they do decide to have a non-conference game, they would open the season against BYU, which I believe they're supposed to open up against somebody. I believe USC this year. Or was it? I believe it was USC this year. But now obviously.
Yeah, Alabama was supposed to play against USC.
Yeah, and now that Pac-12 has said, well, we're not doing any non-conference. Well, the next non-conference team, I would assume they're scheduled would be BYU, who hasn't made a commitment. And I believe BYU is part of the Mountain West Conference. They haven't made a commitment to just do no non-conference games, which I'm sure the group of 5 teams are going to be more resistant to eliminating their non-conference if they can still get that big game scheduled with a Power 5 conference. So for the most part, I guess they're just doing what they feel like is the best. It is interesting to me that since the Pac-12 and the Big Ten are doing 9 and the SEC might just do 8, because you would think, okay, well, if you decide not to do any non-conference, why wouldn't you give them that 9th game in the SEC? Is the SEC kind of reluctant to go to 9 games? I mean, because it's just one of those things. Why would you just do 8 and then or go to 10? You just can't do the 9, have an extra team in there and you play it out. And so, we still have to see what the Big 12 does. Obviously, I believe they already played 9 non-conference games because of their championship game. So it'll be interesting, I would think, the SEC, because if we're honest here, I think SEC is probably the biggest moneymaker out of all the Power 5 conferences just because of how big the brand of the SEC is.
No, yeah, the money is stupid. Like, the money, like this. Football in the South is a different experience on the college level than a lot of people don't realize.
Yeah, and so the money here is, so obviously if they can really kind of restrict operations, the entire NCAA as a whole will be losing a decent amount of revenue from that because of how much the SEC does make for them. Because remember, the SEC is the ones always in the big bowl games and championship games and all that money is going into them. So, that'd be pretty big if something happened. That's why I also feel like the SEC is taking the most time to make a decision on what they want to do because of that. And that's why, listen, SEC commissioner already came out and said, look, it's not looking good right now, but we'll have to see what happens. Obviously, if you look at the demographic of COVID cases, the highest cases in terms of a certain demographic is still kind of in the South. So, that's not good either. So there's some decisions that have to be made clearly here. And at least you already know a couple conferences have a plan in place and they're just going to stick to it because it's not a bubble, but it is a bubble because at least you're sticking to schools within your conference, which usually are just around you. You're not saying, hey, we're going to do this neutral field out in Texas and it's Alabama and USC or whatever. And so it's just like, why are we both going to Texas, which is uprising in COVID cases, and we're leaving our respective campuses and you're putting the players at risk and just all that. That's why they're cutting out all that stuff. So I think it'd just be interesting to see what happens. Obviously, the SEC is going to be a big domino that falls depending on what they actually decide to do with their scheduling for the upcoming season.
Yeah, and let's not forget, one of the talking points that came out of that meeting was the fact that playing 0 non-conference games and just doing everything within the conference doesn't necessarily mean that you're taking lower risk, because there are some in-conference games that are pretty big travelers. So, like, some people do have to go to North Carolina, and they're all the way on the west side of the SEC. And there's just some people have to go to Florida and things like that. And that's not a good destination to be at right now if you are not already in it. So not everything is peaches and cream here. Not everything is cut and dry. It's not all black and white. There's a lot of nuance involved here. And that's the biggest thing. Everything is super nuanced within all this. Nobody has all the right answers, and nobody knows what is the 100% perfect thing to do. And I think, one, that's okay. And I'm glad that they're taking their time. And that's the thing. I don't think people should condemn them for taking their time here. This is not like when the NCAA has, dragged their feet on what to do for, name, image, and likeness, or, being able to compensate players and things like that. This is about how do we make sure that we can still play the game that we love and the game that makes them the most money for all these universities, and also be able to be safe relatively without causing a huge, outbreak, because there's just so many things that are going on. And of course, we'll dive into more about the outbreak stuff potentially within how the NCAA is now dealing with COVID-19, because they put out new legislature that should be released this week. But really, we got to look at it like this. The same thing happened for the NCAA tournament for basketball, right? Not everybody was willing at the very beginning to say, you know what, we're canceling our tournament. The Ivy League canceled their tournament first and foremost. And here we are again. The Ivy League decided to say we're not doing any fall sports. So maybe it happens again. Like maybe we get to the point to where there are not fall sports in college this year, and the Ivy League was first to the bat already. And they're going to have a look at how they can do spring football or spring fall sports, wherever the case may be. But at the very least, we know that people that make a lot of money off of this stuff, they have to take their time in order to see what it is that they can absolutely not do and what can they kind of get away with in order to still make revenue, still make profit. And there's a whole lot of gray areas and a whole lot of things that may be problematic in different ways too. But not everything will be perfect here, and we see it across all different types of sports and all different levels, that nothing done is going to be perfect here because we are in the middle of a pandemic. There is no perfect safety net in the middle of all of this. And I think once we start to realize that, there's going to have to be either a compromise or we're going to have to go one full direction here. And a lot of the compromises seem to be like not bare minimum stuff. And that's what is being the biggest struggle in my eyes with all of this, is that we're not really compromising as so much as we're not even being set up well. Like we have not set up for this well. And that might be just on the idea of just waiting it out too long when we were early in the summertime. Like we waited out to see where the virus was going to be. Some people thought the heat would kill it. And if you look at the index in Arizona comparative to what the testing numbers are and the positive rates, heat is not killing anything. So it is a lot of things that just we didn't know. And we know more than we did maybe even 2 weeks ago than we do now. So every day is a new bit of information we learn about this whole thing. And we just want sports back. But we're going to take our final break, and then we're getting to our last segment talking about the Power 5 releasing a universal testing standards list. That's coming up, GSMC.
Check out the show built around the women of MMA. From the UFC to the extreme cage fighting, we got the fights covered.
Listen.
It's the Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast. The latest news of upcoming fights, discussions of previous matches. Join us as we talk to and about the biggest names in women's mixed martial arts, past, present, and future. When it's the women's fight game, you know where to listen to. The Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast.
Okay, we're back. GSMC Football Nation for your college football, your NFL football needs and wants and all that is in between. It's still me, Ethan. Brice is still on the other line, and we are going to keep on the college football track here, and we're going to be talking about COVID testing standards that were made universal, at least in legislature. I don't believe it has been verified yet, and this has all been through inside information on it, so there is no official pen to paper on it yet, but it should come in the next couple of days. But the Power 5 released a universal testing standards where some of these things are mentioned in it. So it is 10 days minimum of self-quarantine if you test positive. Minimum. So that's players. First and foremost, I should specify that's for players. And it's 14 days if you were been in contact with the virus for more than 15 minutes. So if you were around somebody who had it for even as 15 minutes, no mask or anything in close proximity, you are quarantined off the bat 14 days. So that is already something that is a plus so far to hear that that's going to be at least Power 5 wide. And here comes the interesting thing. So it's 6 pages long, and it'll be 72 hours within games that players will be required to take the PCR testing, and officials will also be tested weekly. So that means your referees, officials, they will be tested weekly. But here's the interesting thing. So there is not a test requirement for coaching staff. However, mask requirements are mandatory if not tested the same way as the players are. So let me repeat that. So coaches are not required to take the test 72 hours within games, but the masks are required to wear if they are not tested the same way the athletes are. So I don't necessarily think that means that coaches don't have to be tested, but it just means they don't have to be tested 72 hours before a game, right? Because I guess you can look at it like this. Coaches can sit in the press box. Coaches can be off the field away from people and still coach a game, right? It still may be different, but it's doable. Like, we've seen coaches do it before. We know coordinators, some coordinators like to sit, in the skybox and look at everything going on the field from up there. And some like to be on the field. It's kind of in preference as of before, but I wouldn't be surprised if we start seeing more coordinators and stuff in press boxes and in boxes by themselves, socially distanced and things like that. So I'm not too worried necessarily about that per se. And I feel like coaches that want to be on the field will probably end up doing the tests anyway to make everybody else feel comfortable. So this also is tied into high-risk sports. So high-risk sports have to follow this regimen basically religiously, while low-risk sports, which I guess mean less contact sports that are in the fall, because this is assuming that you're not canceling all your fall sports, because if football goes, everything goes. So you can't just have one and not the other. Everything has to go if football can't go, and vice versa. So the high-risk sports, so like contact sports like field hockey, football, basketball, whenever that returns during the fall for practices and things like that, and I believe wrestling, if you still have it, things like that. Those sports are considered high risk and must follow these guidelines, while lower risk sports can be a little bit more lenient as when they test and how they handle everything else. So with all that said, a lot of people think that this is a good baseline, as this was been talked about via legislator and from different senators and people who are in committees about the NCAA needs to create a universal testing standard so that way we can build upon it, because before we had nothing. States were left to their own devices, and that didn't work. It hasn't worked so far. we still have a lot of positive tests coming from different universities and areas just from the optional workouts, just from the voluntary workout stuff. So getting ahead to where people are starting to report back to school or are supposed to, this had to have been done. So Brice, after hearing all that, how do you feel so far?
I mean, I feel like they just did what they had to do. Obviously, like you said, we needed some type of universal system for testing. Obviously, that's been the biggest thing, is just coming to an agreement with testing. I think that, really with the COVID-19 way it is, this is just how you got to do it. I mean, this is just how it has to be. There's really no other way around it. You have to, if you really care about the safety of the players and the health of the players, you got to test them rigorously, and you got to do it as much as possible to make sure that you're ensuring everybody's safety and not just saying, well, we're just going to let this slip by the wayside. I remember how you said, or when we talked about the discussions about star players, if they got COVID, with coaches or with teams, how to slip it under the rug. And I just feel like with everything that's happening, with all the concern raised to, with all the testing they're doing, I just don't see that now being the case, because why would you put these rigorous testing in place just to let people still pass by? It would completely ruin the image of the NCAA or any other league if they did something like that. And the NCAA already has a very not so likable image in the public already based on other things. So I don't think they need to try anything like that, even in professional leagues as well, when they implement their own systems. But, I just think they're just doing what they feel like is best. And listen, now they have something. If they need to make changes or make improvements, they can do that. They have the capability of doing that, because literally when you put something on paper and you say this is what it looks like, it sounds good, we have to see how it actually goes. We have to see how it actually, actually looks in action. And then you make the changes accordingly to it to then make sure that everybody is being accommodated, and you're tying up any type of loose ends potentially that could be out there that you didn't maybe see or notice before, potentially in the previous discussions about them, and obviously you talked about also the coach not having to test, but they can. But if they don't, they have to wear a mask. Obviously, I don't know if a coach wants to wear a mask for an entire game. You know what I'm saying? Because especially if it's during the fall, it can get hot out there, and you wearing a mask. I don't know about that. They might just do it just because of that. And also, like you said, to make the players feel better, because, listen, it'd be kind of crazy if everybody else tested and the coach had it and the coach gave it to everybody. That wouldn't be a good image on the college, again, on the NCAA as well, because it's like, well, why would you have this loophole in there for that to even happen? So, it's definitely going to be something that we'll have to keep an eye on when it comes to that, and we'll have to see really kind of how everything kind of turns out when they attempt to put things together here, because now that they have this universal ruling, legislative, they can now see how it works within the confines of the sport and sports in general, and see if they have something that is effective moving forward.
Yeah, for sure. And I guess a lot of people are saying that this might have been just long overdue. And you could say that for both football organizations, the NCAA football side of things and also the NFL side of things, because even when the NBA was getting ready to make this whole bubble thing work, they had the proposal ready, and everybody else kind of had, or the NBA had a full, month and a half before they actually were to, to go to Orlando. And people are basically coming to training camp right now. So, and I mean, there's guidelines, but the players aren't happy with the guidelines. And it seems like there wasn't enough time for refinement or review. Like there was no review process on some of this stuff or how people feel about it. And of course, the NBA isn't perfect with it either. Like there's things that the players don't necessarily like. We don't know if the players even resented things before the Orlando thing took off per se. a lot of things came while they were in Orlando. And I guess, most people don't start complaining until they have to go through it, and they may read it or they may skim through it and don't really know what's going on. But having at least a month for everything to settle in and work out the logistics and all that would have made fans feel a lot better, I feel like. And now it seems like the NCAA and NFL are just tagging stuff on, right? They're just tagging everything on at the very end, and it seems like it might be a potential thing to blow up in their faces. And not to say that what they have here will blow up in their faces, because I feel like this 6-page outline as of right now is a good bare minimum. And I mean that as it really is a bare minimum thing, because let's remind ourselves, the NBA bubble had like 100 something pages in it of
113.
Yeah, 113 pages worth of rules and regulations of what you can and cannot do while in the bubble. And of course, college football, NFL, they are not in any bubble scenario. But for a document to be at this point 6 pages long, comparative to what the NBA has, is kind of laughable, if I have to say so myself. It's pretty comical, but it's something, right? I guess that's what I'm boiling it down to. It is something, and the NCAA brought some sort of uniformity across the Power Five, and I'm assuming the Group of Five and other leagues are figuring things out as they go as well of how they're going to handle this, because I don't believe anybody else has prepared anything. And of course, we know the Ivy League decided to say we're just not going to play. So they don't have to make one. But there's so much going on that, you never really know.
Yeah, and it's something that you kind of, like you said, it's a wait and see approach. Got to see how it all executes itself out. We'll have to see what else kind of happens. Though, Ethan, if I might, I do have some news that I would like to slip in, if that's okay.
Go ahead.
So, obviously, we were talking about the meetings that were happening with the NFL and the NFLPA and the owners and everything right now. We did get one piece of information, and at the time of this recording, this is all we have, is that the NFL and the NFLPA have now agreed to a testing protocol that they've came to an agreement on. And, I skimmed through the article. Really was not really that much information, but they're just saying they agreed. So I'm assuming we're going to get more details about how that will go. But basically, they're going to have testing basically every day now, very consistent testing.
Oh my God.
For the players.
Every day.
Yeah. So, I believe so. They're going to have testing. Yeah. Daily COVID-19 testing plan. Yep. So daily. So, because obviously that's like, that's how like serious it is. Like, I got to make sure every day we good. You still good, right? Because, you don't want a day go by and that's the day they get COVID. And it's like, oh snap, we didn't let them around the entire team.
Wow.
So that's the news I got for you right there, man.
Well, all right. Well, there you have it. We're breaking news right here on the GSMC. So with all that said, we're going to wrap up the podcast today. Thank you all for listening to us and rocking with us so far. And, keep your heads up, stay positive, stay safe, and hopefully we'll get some football going. So don't forget to follow us on social media, our Facebook and our Twitter. And don't forget to rate and review the podcast. So for Brice is Ethan, for GSMC, we'll see you all next week.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Football Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.